Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic a little less philosophical and a lot more greasy medieval junk food. Yes, even in a world without fast food chains, vending machines, or hot dog carts, people still found ways to snack. And let me know in the comments where you retuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. And let me tell you, some of it was delicious. Some of it was disturbing, and all of it was deeply medieval. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. In a world where most snacks looked suspicious and tasted worse, apple fritters were a rare win. Sweet, hot, and slightly dangerous, just like every good medieval decision, these golden little pucks were the closest thing to a medieval donut, minus the frosting and food safety standards. Think small, tart, knobby little things that grew behind the alehouse, or dangled temptingly over a neighbor's fence. Apples that were as likely to have been borrowed as they were to be ripe. So what exactly went into a fritter back then? Apples, obviously, but not the polished, picture-perfect kind that rest in tidy supermarket bins today. They were chopped, tossed in a coarse batter of flour, eggs, and when fortunes allowed ale. You'd grab one after church, trade one for a favor, or sneak one before supper. Kids adored them. Adults appreciated them. Birds were known to dive bomb for them. They were small, greasy symbols of joy, something fast, indulgent, and warmly human in a world of toil. They didn't melt, stretch, or photograph well, but they did what they were meant to: provide comfort, fill bellies, and survive questionable storage practices. Cheese back then wasn't romantic. It was practical. It was tough. It had to endure rough travel, curious animals, and whatever weather the season flung your way. Salt, thyme, and forgiving taste buds covered many culinary sins. In an age without refrigeration, standards shifted. Cheese curds weren't glamorous, but they were reliable. The kind of snack that reminded you life could still offer little blessings in small, salty bites. Picture mashed turnips gently softened mixed with egg, maybe a drizzle of honey or bits of dried fruit, then tucked inside a humble crust of flour, water, and blind optimism. At its best, it was warm and mildly sweet, like a root vegetable pretending to be pudding. At its worst, it tasted like horse feed in a hat. But the logic was sound. Turnips were cheap, and pie crust could mask nearly anything. Water, after all, was a gamble, but ale made everything feel more festive, more alive. It was thrifty, filling, and most importantly, it tried, and trying counted for a lot back then. Made by curdling milk with rennet, yes. From the stomach of a baby animal, they were pressed, salted, and eaten without ceremony. It was warm, kind of sweet, and didn't involve cabbage. And in medieval cuisine, that was basically dessert royalty. Nobles rarely touched them, unless slumming it for sport or politics. But for peasants and pilgrims, it was dessert. In theory. But the meaty ones? They were loved. Greasy, honest, imperfect like the people who made them. Held with dirty hands, then tossed to the ground or to the spirits, depending on your beliefs. The pasty was sacred, but also lunch. For others, a swirl of local honey or a spiced syrup turned necessity into pleasure. Or just eat them by the handful and pretend the barn smell didn't linger on your hands. Fillings varied wildly. If you were near wealth, you might get honest meat. But the result was warm, greasy, and strangely comforting. If not, well, rabbit, eel, pigeon, or anything that twitched might find its way inside. Only with more mystery and a higher chance of tetanus. Unlike other foods, they didn't wait for feasts or saints' days. Pasties were made to be carried, eaten on the road, in the field, or between outbreaks of plague. They were everyday miracles, uncomplicated, familiar, and wonderfully indifferent to drama. They were portable, filling, and by medieval standards, rather fun. Monks snacked on them between prayers. Travelers stuffed them in satchels. Children gobbled them like sweets, especially on lucky days when the cows were generous. Either way, it was enough sweetness to momentarily make you forget your diet mostly consisted of cabbage, pretending to be soup. What if this were pie? And the turnip pie was born. The mixture was then dropped into hot fat, often pig fat, reused far beyond modern standards, infused with mysterious depth and decades of dinners. Deep frying in the 1300s wasn't just cooking. It was a theatrical performance. The sizzle, the smell, the anticipation, everything pointed towards something rare and wonderful. A fritter fresh from the pan, steam rising like a promise, had crispy edges, a soft center, and a faint risk of third-degree burns. If you were among the lucky or the wealthy, that fritter might be kissed with a dusting of imported sugar luxury. So indulgent, it was both decoration and declaration. These were street foods, fairground delights, market day joys. And yes, sometimes they burned, sometimes the apples were sour, and sometimes the batter stuck to your teeth like regret. But when they were good, they were magic. One bite, and you could almost believe that medieval life wasn't all mud and misery. If apple fritters were donuts, then cheese curds were the medieval answer to popcorn. Small, squeaky, irregular, and strangely satisfying. They weren't fancy. Cheese curds were baby cheese, tender morsels fresh from the churning and separating process, long before hardening into the wheels used for trade or fortification. Some were soft, others rubbery. Some squeaked when you bit them, like they were trying to speak. You could fry them, melt them into pottage, or crumble them into stews. Sure, they sometimes tasted a little off, but then again, so did most things. Turnips are not dessert. Let's just start there. But in the medieval world where sugar was rare, apples were seasonal, and desperation wore an apron. Some brave soul looked at a turnip and whispered, it wasn't always terrible. Sometimes it was even decent. The results? Edible, sometimes even cozy. Bakers added spice, when possible nutmeg, in the wealthier abbeys. Pepper if the cook was feeling bold. Sometimes raisins appeared, confusing everyone. But the pie endured. Turnip pies popped up at fairs, feast tables, and enthusiastic monasteries with more vegetables than sense. People liked it, or at least didn't hate it enough to stop making it. If there was a king of comfort food, though, it was the meat pasty, a medieval hot pocket of sorts. Imagine seasoned meat sometimes, pork or venison, sometimes less identifiable, tucked into a thick pastry crust and baked until golden. The pastry kept it warm, protected it from dust, and gave you a built-in napkin. Spices did their best to distract from questionable freshness. Pepper and sage tried valiantly. Sometimes they succeeded. Often they didn't. Some were vegetarian, filled with turnips or leeks on fasting days. Miners etched their initials in the crust, claiming their lunch like treasure. The thick crust edge. And in case you're wondering, yes, people sometimes marked the crust with initials or symbols to claim ownership, especially among miners and laborers in some places. Yes, were they mysterious? Always. But that was part of the charm. You didn't eat a meat pasty to feel safe. You ate it because it tasted good and you were ready to accept the consequences. In a world where brushing your teeth meant rinsing with wine and hoping for the best, candied fennel seeds were the closest thing medieval folks had to breathe mince. Tiny, sugary, and vaguely herbal, they were part treat, part digestive aid, and part dental hazard, all wrapped up in a single oddly satisfying crunch. You either loved them or politely swallowed them whole and nodded in gratitude. You tested one first, gently bit down, slowly listened for cracking sounds, then committed. It was a risk-reward situation every time. They didn't fill your belly, but they left a pleasant taste in your mouth and gave the illusion of refinement, even if you were covered in mud and still had goose grease on your tunic. Spices were sometimes added if the household was feeling wealthy, or showing off nutmeg, cloves, or cinnamon could give the honey cake a bit of flair. And by flair, we mean the ability to cause an entire village to talk about your recipe for a week. Dried fruits were also tossed in, if they hadn't been stolen by the local children or turned into wine. These crispy, salty little strips weren't glamorous, but they were efficient. More likely, some thrifty cook was left staring at a pile of discarded fish skins and thought, what if we just fried it? A splash of hot fat later, and history was made, or at least something vaguely edible was born. Lightweight, non-perishable-ish, and high in fat, exactly what a medieval body craved after a day of hauling firewood or defending sheep from someone else's sheep. Soldiers packed them. Sailors lived off them. Peasants sold them outside taverns for a few coins, and the satisfaction of feeding drunk people something louder than their conversation. Fish skin was plentiful, especially in coastal towns or near rivers where herring, cod, or whatever had been pulled out of the water was processed on site. You made the most medieval snack imaginable: bread soaked in ale. Not fancy craft ale with notes of citrus and a hoppy finish. No, this was flat, low-alcohol medieval ale, brewed in someone's smoky back room with the hygiene standards of a barn owl. Known variously as soups or trench toast, this humble creation was the original comfort food. Was it tasty? In the right light, with a good mood and low expectations, yes, kind of. Not only was it food, it was also a way to stretch ingredients. Bread too stale to chew? Just soak it. Ale starting to turn? Pour it on bread and pretend it's intentional. You and the medieval upper class have something in common. Not just any wine, of course. Usually mulled, sweetened, or spiced wine. Something warm, fragrant, and barely hiding the fact that it had been sitting in a clay jug since last harvest. Once the bread was sufficiently drenched, it was served as a soft, spoonable delicacy. Nobles called it elegant. Everyone else quietly wondered if the cook had just run out of ideas. Sops and wine were one of the more refined, red, bizarrely specific snacks of the Middle Ages. A dessert, technically, or perhaps an experience. Waste was for amateurs. Bread soaked in ale was quick, hearty, and just messy enough to feel like a real break from your daily chores. Once soaked, the bread turned into a kind of sloshy porridge cube. Eat it quickly, or risk ending up with a mushy sponge in your bowl, and a 1,000-year-old food metaphor for disappointment. Still, for a chilly evening by the fire, nothing beat a slice of challah bread mush and a moment of peace. It was warm, bready, and carried the gentle bitterness of fermented grain, which is to say, it didn't actively offend the palate. Think French toast, but without the eggs, sugar, cinnamon, or joy. The meat went to the stew pot, the heads went to the cat, and the skin that got thrown into a pan of bubbling oil and sizzled into submission. Waste not, want not, especially when you're reworking with a fish that frankly smells like it is judging you. While the rich popped them like medieval Tic Tacs, common folk occasionally got their hands on knockoff versions, usually involving honey, crushed herbs, and vague optimism. On feast days, you might even get soup soaked in spiced ale, which basically meant the cook found a nutmeg shaving somewhere and got inspired. They were also used as gifts, bribes, and occasionally passive-aggressive statements. A pinch of salt elevated the experience. A hint of garlic or herbs, well, now you were flirting with culinary excellence. If you fried a batch indoors, your home would smell like Poseidon's laundry for a solid week. But you'd be forgiven because they tasted good. Here, I made this for you. It's sweet unlike your personality. Sweet, dense, and prone to sticking to everything except your expectations. Honey cakes were what happened when bakers got ambitious and sugar was still locked in a castle treasury. But by medieval standards, they were downright elegant, crispy, flavorful, and unlikely to give you dysentery. Honey was the sweetener of the people, assuming those people had bees, access to bees, or weren't afraid of climbing trees and getting stung in the face. These cakes were usually made with flour, water, and generous spoonfuls of honey, or at least what passed for spoonfuls, in an era where spoons were mostly used to fight off siblings. Not quite the same, but good enough to pretend. The sugar coating helped, but there was always that unmistakable herbal kick, the kind of thing that makes you feel both fancy and slightly confused. Candied seeds also had a job to do: digestion. People believed fennel helped settle the stomach. Slicing them required a sturdy knife and the quiet hope that no one was watching you struggle. Eating them was easier, just don't expect a fluffy bite. These cakes were built for medieval life, tough, durable, and coated in enough sticky honey to make your hands feel like you lost a battle with a beehive. But they were satisfying. They tasted like warmth and indulgence, like the rare moment you weren't chewing salted barley or chasing rats out of your cupboard. They were joy wrapped in sugar, with just enough chew to count as cardio, especially after a heavy meal involving 3 types of bird and an alarming amount of mead. Think of them as the medieval version of chewing gum crossed with Tums, but with more potential to chip a tooth. These little seeds were typically coated in a hard shell of sugar, which was no small feat in the Middle Ages. Sugar had to be imported, boiled, beaten, and poured by hand, meaning someone somewhere really believed in the potential of these tiny snacks. They were especially popular in noble households, where guests might be handed a small dish of them after dinner to freshen the mouth, and probably to distract from the mutton still clinging to their murs. Flavor-wise, fennel seeds had a strong licorice-like bite, and yes, they were hard. Like crack your mare if you're too confident hard. You didn't chew candied fennel seeds casually. In the grand lineup of medieval junk food, candied fennel seeds were small but mighty. If medieval desserts had a golden child, it was the honey cake. The result: a firm, chewy slab that could either be a delightful snack or a makeshift doorstop, depending on how long it had been sitting near the hearth. Honey cakes were popular at feasts, festivals, and weddings, mostly because they could be made ahead of time, didn't spoil quickly, and could survive being dropped on the ground, stepped on, or thrown at someone in a mild food fight. Structurally, they weren't what you'd call delicate. Many resembled compact bricks, fried fish skin cracklings, possibly the most unexpectedly delightful snack to emerge from a culture that also thought eel pie was a good idea. Let's be honest, no one set out to invent this. The result was surprisingly addictive. A thin, crispy snack that crunched like a dried leaf, but tasted like concentrated ocean. These cracklings weren't just tasty. They were practical. Did they sometimes still have scales? Yes. Did they occasionally curl into weird shapes that made you question your life choices? Also yes. The only real drawback: smell. These things could announce their presence from 3 huts away. When life gave you stale bread and warm beer, you didn't cry. Here is how it worked. You took yesterday's bread, the kind that could double as building material, and dunked it into a bowl of ale. The bread absorbed the ale like a sponge with trust issues. It softened, swelled, and transformed from a jawbreaker into something vaguely edible. This snack was especially popular with the working class people who didn't have time for multiple courses or cutlery, but still needed calories that wouldn't fight back. Sometimes people added extras: a sprinkle of herbs, a bit of cheese, or a fried egg if the hen felt generous that morning. And like many medieval dishes, this one had dual purpose. The only downside? It didn't travel well. If you've ever looked at a slice of bread and thought, this would be better submerged in alcohol, congratulations. The concept was simple. Take bread, ideally toasted or at least not completely stale, and dunk it in wine. This was not finger food. It was the kind of dish you ate with a spoon, very slowly, while pretending to be interested in lute music. And in case you're wondering, yes, people sometimes marked the crust with initials or symbols to claim ownership, especially among miners and laborers in some places. These designs didn't enhance the flavor, but they did give you something to stare at while chewing thoughtfully and pretending you weren't disappointed. Structurally, wafers were delicate. They cracked if you looked at them wrong and shattered if you tried to break them cleanly. And sealed in a jar like a sweet little hostage. Then you drain it, let it dry a bit, and repeat. Several times, because once wasn't enough. You weren't just preserving fruit, you were declaring war on moisture itself. Eventually, the result was a glossy, jewel-toned bite of candy chewy, intense, and so sweet it could probably be weaponized in large enough doses. Some versions were soft and syrupy, served in ornate glass jars. Others were dry, rolled in extra sugar, and handed out as dainty little cubes of medieval hypoglycemia. But make no mistake, sucket came with status. It said you had access to sugar, trade routes, and at least one servant dedicated solely to stirring things that didn't want to be stirred. Sucket trays were passed around after banquets like edible gold coins. Guests took one piece, smiled graciously, and immediately regretted not grabbing 3. As for commoners, they watched from the kitchen and maybe licked a spoon if no one was looking. So, was it worth it? Honestly? Yes. Sucket was one of the few medieval snacks that genuinely felt like dessert. It was rich, refined, and just extravagant enough to make up for the fact that dinner had included boiled something. Think candied oranges, dates, or ginger coated in enough sugar to make your teeth tingle and your conscience whisper, "You shouldn't be eating this." But you did, because it was delicious, and probably imported. And also, you didn't have much else. Sucket wasn't for the everyday peasant chewing his 7th onion of the week. No, this was elite-tier snacking. The kind of indulgence served in noble halls or gifted by the wealthy to say, "I like you, but not enough to give you land." Sugar was expensive, and fruits weren't always in season. So sucket was reserved for special occasions, like weddings, royal visits. Or Wednesday, if you were outrageously rich and out of control. Storing them was a challenge. Transporting them, even more so. Which made eating them outdoors a high-stakes affair involving crumbs, wind, and regret. Still, they were beloved, light, crispy, and vaguely celebratory. Wafers were the medieval version of treating yourself, without completely wrecking your digestion or your wallet. For nobles, they came stacked with fruit or layered with soft cheese. For everyone else, they were sold by the dozen in street stalls and eaten immediately before they disintegrated into edible confetti. Sucket. Even the name sounds sticky. This medieval treat was essentially fruit that had been boiled into submission, drowned in syrup. The preparation process was ambitious. First, you'd boil the fruit in syrup, maybe honey, maybe refined sugar if your spice merchant owed you a favor. Ah, fried eel, the grand finale of medieval junk food. A dish so strangely beloved, it made its way from peasant hearths to royal banquets without once stopping to ask, "Wait, am I really the best option here?" Yes, it was. Eel was everywhere in medieval Europe. Rivers and streams practically writhed with them. They were easy to catch, cheap to cook, and when fried, surprisingly crispy. Slippery when raw, bonnier than expected, and shaped like the villain in a fish-themed horror story, eel was still eaten by the bucketload. Why? Because it was tasty. And more importantly, it wasn't turnips. To prepare it, you'd first have to catch the eel, usually at night, when they slithered through shallow waters like sentient noodles. Then came the unpleasant task of skinning them, which was less like prepping a fish and more like wrestling a wet rope that didn't want to die. Once subdued, the eels were chopped, seasoned, and tossed into hot fat until the skin crisped up and the meat firmed into something vaguely appealing. The finished product, a crunchy, savory bite with a rich, slightly oily flavor, like if calamari and chicken had an identity crisis in a tavern kitchen. Fried eel was served at fairs, feasts, roadside inns, and believe it or not, during religious fasts. That's right. Eel wasn't technically meat, so it slipped through dietary loopholes like itself. Monks ate it. Nobles flaunted it. Kings had it stuffed into pies and paraded across banquet tables, like the sea serpent it always wanted to be. Sure, it had bones, lots of them. And yes, it occasionally wriggled long after death. But if you could get past that, and the haunting feeling that you were eating a villain from a cautionary, folktale fried eel was genuinely delicious. Crispy skin, tender inside, and just greasy enough to make you feel like you were living a little too dangerously for a Wednesday afternoon. Today, it might seem bizarre. Back then, it was a delicacy, a slippery little miracle that kept bellies full, and menus weird. In temple tradition, interpretations were often binary marked clearly in red or black ink. If your dream was classified as bad, it was time to light some incense and beg a priest to intervene. Central to this belief was the practice of incubation, a ritual where individuals would sleep inside a temple in hopes of receiving a healing vision. The Anirakrite, or dream readers, were the real stars of the public square. Using dream manuals, omens, and an enormous supply of interpretive flair, they translated dreams into warnings, blessings, or instructions. The most famous of these guides was the Wonera Critica, written by Artemidorus of Daldis in the 2nd century CE, a book still studied centuries later. The Emperor Augustus was said to have dreamt of future glory, and even Nero consulted dream interpreters during his reign. Perhaps not enough, considering how that turned out. In Anatolia, modern-day Turkey dream healing thrived in a rich blend of Hittite, Phrygian, and later Greco-Roman traditions, with temples and sacred sites dedicated to facilitating contact with divine forces through sleep. The most fascinating example comes from the cult of Men, a Phrygian lunar god associated with healing, cycles, and naturally, dreams. Pilgrims traveled long distances, often forming temporary healing communities bound not by blood, but by shared vulnerability and hope. Through sleep, they believed the gods could reset the course of their lives. In Anatolia, to dream wasn't passive. It was an act of ritual participation, where healing and prophecy flowed not from logic, but from the silent language of sleep. His temples often sat on hills facing the night sky, as if positioned to catch lunar messages beamed down into the dreams of supplicants. People suffering from physical ailments, spiritual unrest, or uncertainty about their futures would come to these shrines to practice incubation ritual sleep with the hope of receiving a curative or guiding dream. The Roman general Scipio Africanus, before defeating Hannibal, reportedly had a dream of victory sent by the spirits of his ancestors. Worshippers might walk labyrinth paths or sleep beneath celestial carvings, believing their proximity to sacred geometry would focus divine messages. Music, incense, and chant were often used to tune the sleeper's mind to the divine frequency. This wasn't sleep for rest, it was sleep as spiritual reception. Texts from the region also mention dream priests, spiritual specialists, trained to guide and interpret these visions. Some would even see dream-suggesting imagery or symbols before sleep to shape the encounter. For example, someone wanting a vision of their future child might sleep with a carved fertility idol under their pillow. If they dreamt of a lion, the priest might declare that a brave son was on the way. If they dreamt of rain, a daughter blessed by growth and wisdom. Hittite records also reference divine encounters in dreams, especially among royalty. Kings and queens received strategic advice, healing knowledge, and occasionally harsh warnings from the gods in their sleep. One dream reportedly instructed a queen to adopt a foreign goddess into her shrine, an early example of divine diplomacy. In ancient societies, prophetic dreams weren't side notes. They were tools of power, instruments of policy, and evidence of divine selection. The fate of nations, the health of empires, and the rise of legends often began with something as simple as a whispered vision in the dark. In Greece, The dream wasn't just a nighttime experience. It was a bridge between mortal and divine, body and soul, illness and healing. And if you were lucky, you'd wake up with a cure, and maybe a snake curled at your feet. No deity was more closely tied to this practice than Asclepius, the god of medicine. These weren't just messages, they were warnings, revelations, or calls to action. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal claimed he saw the gods in his dreams, guiding him to success in war and governance. Prophetic dreams were seen as confirmation that a ruler had divine legitimacy essential in a world where the line between king and deity was thin. The Greeks also recognized this prophetic potential. Dreams from the subconscious were called enhypnia, but those that revealed truth were oneiroi alphinoi. These were not taken lightly. Before major decisions founding a city, declaring war, launching a voyage, Greek leaders often consulted dreams or those trained to interpret them. Dreams were so revered, they had their own minor deities, the oneiroi, winged spirits who entered the sleeper's mind with messages from the gods. For cultures spanning Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, and beyond, prophetic dreams were sacred transmissions from a higher plane, direct links to gods, fate, or the mysterious mechanisms of the cosmos. In the ancient Hebrew tradition, prophetic dreams were a respected channel of divine communication. The Old Testament is filled with examples. Think of Joseph, son of Jacob, who dreamt of sheaves of wheat bowing before his own, a symbol of his future rise to power. Later, as an interpreter of Pharaoh's dreams in Egypt, he predicted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. That one dream of cows, fat and thin, altered the course of Egypt's economy. Joseph didn't just read dreams, he became a national strategist by doing so. At temples known as Asclepia, which dotted the Greek world from Epidaurus to Pergamon, the sick, the hopeful, and the desperate came seeking cures. But instead of pills or potions, they were prescribed sleep sacred, intentional, and performed under specific spiritual conditions. Before entering the temple's sleeping quarters, or abaton, a person would undergo purification, bathing, fasting, and sometimes sacrificing an animal. Only after these rituals could they lie down on a stone bed and wait for the god to appear in a dream. The results, according to inscriptions and ancient testimonies, varied. Some patients dreamed of Asclepius touching them with his staff, or of snakes, his sacred animal, slithering over their bodies. They would awaken healed, or at least believe they had received divine instructions on what to do next. Whether these dreams were real, psychosomatic, or placebo-driven, the effects were profound. Greek physicians, including Hippocrates, acknowledged the value of dreams in diagnosis. They didn't dismiss them as nonsense. In fact, they believed the body could reveal its state through symbolic visions. A dream of flowing water might suggest kidney issues. A dream of being crushed could point to a chest ailment. In Hippocratic texts, dreams were classified as either natural or divine. Natural dreams were caused by diet, digestion, or emotional stress. Divine ones, a whole other category, were direct messages from the gods or the cosmos. Priests in temple complexes, especially those serving healing deities like Serket or Thoth, sometimes offered services in dream incubation, where supplicants would sleep in the temple and await guidance or healing through visions. The idea was to open a divine channel through purification, prayer, and controlled sleep. This wasn't mere superstition. It was healthcare, divination, and theology rolled into one night's rest. Dreams also influenced magic and medicine. Amulets might be prescribed to fend off recurring nightmares. Specific rituals could be performed to erase a dream, much like you'd erase a curse. For the ancient Egyptians, the sleeping mind was not idle. It was a stage where gods, demons, and the spirits of the dead could appear and offer glimpses into hidden truths, if you had the wisdom and the priest to decode them. In the ancient Greek world, dreams were more than divine whispers. They were clinical appointments with the gods. But not all dream interpreters wore white robes and carried scrolls. Throughout the ancient world, one category of dream carried more weight than all others: the prophetic dream. Likewise, in Mesopotamia, kings often received dreams that foretold victory, disaster, or divine favor. Even the Romans, typically more pragmatic, took prophetic dreams seriously. While Greek Asclepian temples are the most famous, ancient dream incubation was not exclusive to Greece. The process was similar to what we saw in Asclepian practices, but Anatolian incubation had its own twists. Dream incubation in Anatolia wasn't just personal, it was communal and cosmic. By the 2nd century CE, the ancient art of dream interpretation had matured into a disciplined craft, and one man took it upon himself to systematize it all: Artemidorus of Daldis, a Greek from Asia Minor. Artemidorus wrote the Wonera Critica, the most comprehensive and influential dream manual of the ancient world. Unlike mystical scribes who veiled everything in divine mystery, Artemidorus approached dreams with the methodical precision of a scholar and the curiosity of a streetwise psychologist. A dream of dying didn't mean death, it could mean renewal. Some were terrors from the depths dark, haunting visions believed to come from restless spirits, demonic forces, or even the underworld itself. These weren't seen as mere bad nights of sleep. They were warnings, punishments, or omens of things to come. Hades, Persephone, and even the terrifying Erinyes could appear in dreams to express divine displeasure or signal a crime left unpunished. Dreamers who ignored these warnings did so at their peril. The philosopher Plato, in the Republic, described the dream as a battleground between reason and appetite, where the lower parts of the soul ran wild. For him, the nightmare was not just a spiritual warning, but a psychological one, an indication that your inner self was out of balance. The Babylonians were among the first to differentiate dreams of divine origin from those that came from malevolent forces. If a dream caused fear, illness, or distress, it was considered polluted, and a priest would be called to perform apotropaic rituals, cleansing spells, offerings, or symbolic actions designed to neutralize the dream's effect. For example, if someone dreamed of being chased by a demon, the interpreter might recommend sleeping with a protective amulet under the pillow or burning cedarwood incense to ward off evil spirits. A dream of sex didn't always refer to desire. It might signal dominance, power struggles, or guilt. Certain dreams were believed to be caused by malicious entities, including the dead. Amulets bearing the eye of Horus or images of Bes, the dwarf god who protected households from dark forces, were worn to guard against these attacks. They believed the dead could visit the living through dreams, sometimes to warn, sometimes to accuse. In every culture, nightmares were more than bad dreams. They were seen as cosmic red flags, reminders that the seen and unseen worlds were always connected, and that even in sleep, there was no true escape from fate. Some people even recited dream-erasing spells upon waking, treating the nightmare as a contagious curse that had to be spoken out of existence before it could manifest in the physical world. His interpretations walked a strange line between deeply logical and incredibly bizarre. The Wonera Critica wasn't just a curiosity. It was used for centuries across the Roman Empire and Byzantine world. It influenced medieval dream interpreters and was translated into Arabic, keeping the flame alive long after classical temples fell. With Artemidorus, the dream became a text to be studied and decoded, not just for prophecy, but for insight. He may not have believed dreams came from gods, but he certainly believed they came from somewhere deep, strange, and worth exploring. The Wonera Critica wasn't some mystical pamphlet. It was a 5-book tome written in clear Greek, filled with thousands of dream scenarios and their meanings, culled from personal interviews, temple records, and public performances. Artemidorus claimed he spent decades collecting dream accounts from people of all walks of life: sailors, merchants, prostitutes, soldiers. His logic was simple. If you want to understand the soul of a culture, listened to its dreams. He organized dreams into categories: actions, animals, professions, bodily functions, even types of relationships. Dreaming of flying could suggest freedom or arrogance. Dreaming of being naked in public, depending on your social class, might mean shame or future power. Dreaming of teeth falling out meant a loss, usually of relatives. That one seems to have stuck through the centuries. What made Artemidorus unique was that he emphasized context. Unlike earlier dream books, which gave static meanings, he stressed the importance of the dreamer's status, gender, occupation, and current life circumstances. A wealthy man dreaming of a shipwreck meant business troubles. A poor man dreaming of the same thing might find new fortune. Interpretation wasn't one size fits all. It was tailored, almost like early psychotherapy. Artemidorus also tackled symbolism head-on. He understood that dreams used metaphor and irony. Not all dreams in the ancient world were gifts from the gods. The Egyptians also had a well-developed idea of nightmare prevention. In Greek thought, nightmares often signified a message not from the Olympians, but from chthonic deities, gods of the earth and the underworld. Even the Romans, practical as ever, feared dreams of certain animals like owls, snakes, or wolves as signs of impending death, betrayal, or war. In the ancient world, dreams weren't just spiritual, they were political assets. Rulers, priests, whether divine revelation or calculated propaganda, dreams were a powerful currency, turning the subconscious into statcraft one vision at a time. Generals, much of what we believe today about dreams, our fascination with symbolism, recurring motifs, even nightmares, has roots in ancient frameworks that tried to make sense of the sleeping mind, and prophets often weaponized dreams to justify decisions. In Islamic mysticism, dreams became deeply respected as means of divine guidance. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud argued that dreams expressed repressed desires and fears, but he still used ancient tools: metaphor, symbol, narrative. His protégé Carl Jung went further, describing the dream world as populated by archetypes, universal figures like the shadow, the hero, and the wise old man, eerily similar to figures one might find in a Greek temple or Babylonian omen list. Even modern neuroscience, meanwhile, Christian monks and theologians began cataloging dreams of saints and martyrs, visions that often predicted future miracles or divine justice. The same structure remained: sleep as a portal to the sacred, dreams as veiled messages, and interpreters as the bridge between human and divine. Sway public opinion or consolidate authority. When the gods spoke in sleep, those in power were quick to say, "They spoke to me." Take Alexander the Great, for instance. Before he conquered Egypt, he reportedly dreamed of the god Ammon welcoming him as a son. Upon arrival at the Siwa oasis, the local oracle confirmed the dream, declaring Alexander a divine offspring. Was the dream real? Was it staged? It didn't matter. The message solidified his rule and painted him as more than mortal, a living god in the eyes of his troops and subjects. Dreams were especially useful during political transitions or uncertain times. In ancient Rome, Augustus claimed to have dreamed of a great victory at Actium, which he won against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Afterward, this dream was immortalized in literature and coins, turning it into a sacred narrative. Later emperors followed suit. If the gods supported your dream, who dared oppose your actions? Priests and oracles often played into this. Dream interpretation became a theological tool, especially when it aligned with the interests of a ruler or temple elite. Suppose a rebellious governor dreamed of disaster. The priest might interpret it as divine punishment for challenging imperial authority. On the flip side, dreams of fruitfulness and victory, interpreted correctly, could embolden leaders to begin campaigns, raise taxes, or enact reforms. This wasn't limited to men. Queen Hatshepsut of Egypt claimed in temple inscriptions that her birth was foretold in a dream by the god Amun, who appeared to her mother and prophesied divine rulership. By framing her reign as destined in dreams, she strengthened her legitimacy in a male-dominated throne. Prophets in the Hebrew Bible also used dreams to challenge kings. Daniel, for instance, interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream of a great statue, forecasting the rise and fall of empires. It wasn't just dream reading. It was geopolitics wrapped in allegory. In every civilization, dreams allowed leaders to say, "This is not just my will, it is the will of heaven." Though the ancient temples have crumbled, and the priests of dreams now sleep beneath layers of dust, the legacy of ancient dream interpretation lives on, whispering through time, science, and psychology. The medieval world inherited these traditions wholesale. Islamic scholars translated the Wanara Critica of Artemides into Arabic, refining and expanding on it. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and we meet Sigmund Freud, who, despite rejecting religious interpretations, borrowed heavily from the symbolic structures pioneered millennia before. While modern science has stripped dreams of their mysticism, it still respects their complexity, REM sleep, lucid dreaming, and the influence of trauma or memory on dream content. These ideas echo ancient notions that dreams reflect both the health of the body and the state of the soul. Pop culture, too, carries on the torch. From film and literature to tarot and New Age spirituality, dreams remain a source of fascination. This lag wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a political problem. It would cross mountains, deserts, rivers, and territories that had barely been mapped. It was the brainchild of three ambitious businessmen from the freight and stagecoach firm, Russell, Majors, and Waddell. A devout and meticulous planner, he demanded discipline from his employees, even requiring riders and station masters to swear oaths against drinking and cursing. The full distance spanned nearly 2,000 miles, stretching from St. Joseph, Missouri to Sacramento, California, through a dizzying array of landscapes. Rolling plains, mountain ranges, high deserts, and dangerous river crossings. To make this insane idea work, the founders built a chain of approximately 190 relay stations spaced every 10 to 15 miles about the distance a horse could ride at full speed before tiring. Wild animals, swollen rivers, and collapsing trails were daily hazards. A crowd gathered at the stables of the Pikes Peak Stables building, buzzing with excitement. The inaugural rider, most likely Johnny Fry, though records are somewhat disputed, mounted his horse, took the leather mochila, and dashed off westward at breakneck speed. The crowd cheered. Cannons fired. And just like that, a new chapter in American history thundered to life. The mailbag Fry carried weighed around 20 pounds, filled with letters, newspapers, and telegrams bound for California. A telegraph message had already been wired from Washington, D.C., and would now travel the rest of the way on horseback, symbolizing the union of technology and raw human effort. At the same moment, a counterpart in Sacramento rode eastward, launching the bidirectional relay. Between them stood nearly 2,000 miles of wilderness, 190 stations, and some of the harshest terrain North America had to offer, and they planned to cross it in just 10 days. And then there were human dangers, bandits, outlaws, and the rising tensions of conflict with Native American tribes. But despite the chaos, the system worked. With riders swapping every 75 to 100 miles and fresh horses every 10 to 15, the mail flew across the continent in as little as 10 days, a revolutionary speed at the time. It was a logistical miracle, stitched together by courage, sweat, and raw determination. In a land where miles meant isolation, the Pony Express stitched together a fragile thread of connection, one hoofbeat at a time. Every 75 to 100 miles, a home station provided rest and shelter for the riders, where they could sleep, eat, and hand off the mail to a fresh rider. He also developed a highly structured system for the express. Stations would be built every 10 to 15 miles, larger home stations every 75 to 100 miles, and the entire route would be maintained like a military operation. They were chosen not for looks or stature, but for sheer speed and stamina. In the east, fleet-footed thoroughbreds ruled the prairie. In the rugged west, compact and hardy mustangs carried the mail across mountains and deserts. These were the Ferraris of the frontier. Riders would gallop at full speed, jump off mid-stride, and leap onto a fresh mount in a matter of seconds. Each station had to be manned, stocked, and secure. Some were little more than sod huts or wooden shacks. Others were fortified structures, surrounded by barbed fencing and guarded by station keepers with rifles. Supplies, water, feed, and food had to be transported in advance. This meant months of preparation, and it all had to be done in some of the most remote, inhospitable land in America. William B. Waddell, the quietest of the trio, provided the legal and financial backbone. While Russell was the salesman and Majors the operational genius, Waddell kept the books and ensured the company stayed afloat, at least for a while. Together, the three poured hundreds of thousands of dollars into the venture. They bought over 400 horses, hired more than 80 riders, and built roughly 190 stations across the most remote parts of the frontier. They knew it was a gamble, and they knew the route would be grueling. But they also knew that whoever solved the communication crisis would earn a permanent place in American history. And so, without any government funding, they launched the service themselves. It was a bold move, financially reckless, logistically insane, and yet deeply symbolic of American grit. In April of 1860, the Pony Express was ready to ride. The race against time and terrain was on. Based in Missouri, the trio William H. Russell, Alexander Majors, and William B. Waddell were already veterans in the overland shipping world. Their company was responsible for hauling freight and government supplies across the wild frontier. But in 1860, they set their sights at a far more radical goal: speeding up mail delivery to California in the shortest time possible. At the time, Russell in particular was feeling the pressure. His reputation was on the line due to financial scandals and failed ventures. He saw the Pony Express not just as a patriotic service, but as a personal redemption, a way to restore his name and gain favor with the government. If they could prove their relay system worked, they hoped to land a lucrative federal mail contract. There would be extreme heat, freezing nights, and the ever-present danger of ambush. But if it worked, it would be the fastest communication line between East and West. The problem was clear. America was expanding faster than its infrastructure. And so, with a mix of desperation, ambition, and pure frontier daring, a solution galloped into history one saddlebag at a time. The Pony Express was about to be born. The federal government worried that California, increasingly isolated, might drift away in spirit or loyalty. In an era where secession was already on the horizon, maintaining unity across the continent was not just ideal, it was urgent. Entrepreneurs and visionaries began floating bold solutions. None bolder than the idea of creating a central relay system using the one thing the American West had in abundance: open land and fast horses. If skilled riders could gallop across the country in shifts, swapping horses at stations every 10 to 15 miles, maybe, just maybe, they could cut delivery time from weeks to just 10 days. Whether it's a horror film based on sleep paralysis or a dream journal app promising self-discovery, the ancient idea still pulses beneath. What we see in Sleep Matters. In the end, the ancients may not have had brain scans or sleep labs, but they understood something we still chase today. Dreams are not random. They are stories, signals, or shadows whispered in the language of gods, ancestors, or ourselves. The question remains the same across time. What is your dream trying to tell you? In the mid-19th century, the United States was a country stretching at the seams. By 1860, California had been a state for a full decade, but it often felt more like a distant cousin than a sibling. The eastern half of the country buzzed with cities, telegraphs, and railroads, while the western frontier remained rugged, remote, and painfully disconnected. A letter from New York to San Francisco could take 3 to 4 weeks, sometimes longer, if storms, delays, or bandits got in the way. And that's if it arrived at all. Mail routes at the time were as convoluted as they were inefficient. The most common path involved ships carrying mail down the Atlantic, across the Isthmus of Panama, then back up the Pacific coast, a journey filled with delays, tropical diseases, and logistical nightmares. Meanwhile, the overland route via stagecoach was slow, perilous, and frequently bogged down by muddy trails, snowbound passes, or attacks from outlaws in hostile terrain. It was an insane proposal. The route would be nearly 2,000 miles from St. Joseph, Missouri, to Sacramento, California. The Pony Express didn't just materialize out of the dust. Alexander Majors brought the logistics brain. Creating the Pony Express route was like building a fragile bridge across a continent with no safety net and almost no margin for error. But the real backbone of the Express was the horses, more than 400 in all. Weather posed one of the biggest threats. Riders would endure snowstorms in the Sierra Nevada, sandstorms in the Utah desert, and brutal summer heat on the Nebraska plains. On April 3, 1860, the Pony Express made its historic debut in St. Joseph, Missouri. As fast as a horse could ride, nothing could compete with the speed of a wire. Just 2 days after the Pony Express officially launched in April 1860, construction began on the transcontinental telegraph, a coast-to-coast communication system that would transmit messages in minutes rather than days. Telegraph poles and lines advanced steadily, stretching westward from the Missouri River and eastward from California. Every mile of wire spelled another nail in the coffin of the Express. The Pony Express galloped straight into the mythology of the American West, becoming one of the most enduring and romanticized stories in the nation's history. In reality, it was a risky, short-lived business venture, but in the public imagination, it became something far greater, a symbol of heroism, speed, and the relentless frontier spirit. Hollywood, dime novels, and school textbooks transformed the Express into legend. The image of a lone rider silhouetted against the sunset, thundering across the prairie with a leather mail pouch and a six-shooter at his side, captured the nation's heart. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was national identity in motion. By October 24, 1861, just 18 months after the first ride, the final wire was strung across the country. The Pony Express offered a story of bravery. Statues of galloping riders now stand in cities along the old trail, from St. Joseph to Sacramento. Highways and bike paths trace the original route. Reenactments, museum exhibits, and historical tours keep the memory alive. Even the U.S. Postal Service has issued Pony Express stamps, honoring the brief but bold endeavor that helped unite the nation. Sacrifice and unity through hardship. Figures like Pony Bob Haslam and Buffalo Bill Cody became frontier celebrities. Cody, whether he rode for the Express or not, capitalized on the legend in his Wild West shows, cementing the image of the fearless teenage courier in the minds of millions across the world. The Express became shorthand for grit, daring, and everything Americans wanted to believe about their pioneer past. The system went live, and the connection was instantaneous. That very same day, the Pony Express carried its last letter. The thunder of hoofbeats was replaced by the rhythmic click of Morse code. The Pony Express reminds us of a moment in history when human endurance raced neck and neck with nature's obstacles, when communication meant risk and connection required courage. It tells us that speed once came not from satellites, but from sheer determination and a willingness to ride through snow, desert, and darkness with nothing but a horse and a dream. In our age of instant messages and global networks, it's easy to forget just how hard-won communication once was. The Pony Express stands as a tribute to those who bridged impossible distances, not with fiber optics or electricity, but with muscle, grit, and a pounding heartbeat. But even before the telegraph, the Pony Express was bleeding money. Despite its legendary performance, it was a commercial disaster. Russell, Majors, and Waddell had poured more than $700,000 into the operation and barely recouped a fraction. Riders turned to other frontier jobs. Stations were repurposed or abandoned, and the nation turned its eyes to the future. The fall of the Pony Express was not a failure. It was a passing of the torch. The horse gave way to the wire, just as the wire would one day yield to radio, satellites, and the internet. But for one brief, shining moment, America watched in awe as teenage boys and powerful horses conquered time and distance. In a world obsessed with speed, the Pony Express galloped into legend and left hoofprints no telegraph wire could ever erase. With no federal subsidy and enormous operational costs horses, riders, stations, supply logistics, the Express was never a sustainable business model. It was built as a proof of concept, a bold advertisement for a federal mail contract that never fully came through. Russell himself faced financial scandal, and the company began to collapse. By the time the telegraph was completed, the Pony Express was already on its last legs, heroic, beloved, but completely obsolete. Yet the end came with little bitterness. The very goal the Pony Express had set out to prove, that rapid, coast-to-coast communication, was possible, had been achieved. Though it lasted only 18 months, at a time when America was still defining itself, monuments soon followed. But the story endures for a deeper reason. Its legend remains not because it lasted, but because, for a brief and shining moment, it outran the impossible. So as you settle deeper into stillness tonight, let the echoes of hoofbeats lull you into calm, the soft thud of galloping horses carrying more than just mail across windswept plains. They carried hope, connection, and the belief that no distance was too vast to cross. For 18 short months, teenage riders risked life and limb under stars and sun, through blizzards and sandstorms, not for fame, but for a cause bigger than themselves, to unite a sprawling, uncertain nation. Their names have mostly faded, but their courage still flickers in quiet moments like this one. In the days before satellites, fiber optics, or blinking notifications, communication came not with a ping, but with a pounding heart, a firm grip on reins, and a trust in the road ahead. The Pony Express wasn't built to last, and it didn't, but in that brief flash of motion, it bridged worlds. It reminded the young country that we were one people, bound not just by geography, but by determination, imagination, and grit. Even as the telegraph took over and wires replaced trails, something enduring was left behind. A myth, yes, but also a memory of effort, bravery, and relentless motion. A memory worth holding on to in this moment of quiet. Let your thoughts drift like riders through the hills, untethered and steady. As night carries you gently forward, you are safe. You are still. And the world, once too vast to connect, now hums quietly all around you. Sleep well.